Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leaders Show, where each week we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on YouTube and LinkedIn, and the audio recording is available on major podcast platforms. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Institute for RPA and AI and the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members worldwide, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. You can check us out at irpaai.com. This week, we're discussing culture change and corporate storytelling, plus other headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher, an author, an educator, and a former advisor from EY and Accenture. Carlos, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Great to be back. Nice to be back for another week.
So we're, getting towards summer, kind of whittling down the last couple weeks of summer. What's going on?
Well, at a personal level, we talked about this, right? I'm actually returning to school this fall. So I decided to go back and tackle a PhD at the University of Maryland. So I'm looking forward to that. Classes start next week. So big news on my side is with the book kind of out now is returning back to school and working on further research, really for the sequel. So that's big. And of course, watching the headlines and also reading a profile of Elon Musk's, partner, who was on the cover of this new Wired issue, which is an interesting interview with her. And about her, I guess she's a multimedia artist and musician, and her life with Elon and their children. So interesting article as the summer wraps up.
You're obsessed, man. You're just obsessed with Elon.
I didn't pick the cover story. It just landed in my mailbox, and there it was. So it was.
So you would tell me before we went live that she's the mother of his children, and his kids are named X and Y. That must be a joke. You must be joking.
No, it seems that's her kids. One is the name X, and which corresponds to the a gender assignment apparently. So the kids are describes how interested they are in technology. I guess one's a rocket enthusiast, and the other one cares about sort of industrial engineering at a very young age. So anyway, interesting profile. We'll leave it at that.
Okay, go check that out. Yeah, there are a few things jumped out at me this week, Carlos. I'm very amazed at just the dichotomy that you see every week in the news between the economy's bad, the economy's good. People are losing jobs. There's a lot of jobs to be had, and so S&P downgraded U.S. banks this week. There's some other organizations out there that have downgraded the Chinese economy this week. But meanwhile, there's this article. Where was this article from? I can't remember, but based on a survey that the Federal Reserve did that says that Americans, aren't even accepting new jobs if they don't start at $78,000, which I don't know. Last I checked, I think is like twice the average salary of somebody in the U.S.
Right. That's more of a lot of new PhD fellows in science make, right? For them, $775 is actually a great starting salary coming out of a PhD in chemistry or physics program. And so, it's an interesting economy, right? The market, as it's up one day, down the next day, down 10 points, up 10 points. The market was happy yesterday. Today, it seems like it can't make up its mind. My sense is that everybody is waiting on NVIDIA tomorrow, right? They released earnings after the close. And after what happened last time, the stock had the single biggest gain, or a single overnight gain in stock market history. And so I think they're waiting to see, well, can you follow that up? Or was that, is it time to retreat? So I think everybody's sort of waiting on what happens with NVIDIA as a bellwether for the entire tech sector, which continues to drive the market.
Oh, I thought it was an interesting number, that the Fed Reserve came out with in New York, the Federal Reserve in New York. Apparently, that's up significantly. It's up $10,000 in 2 years, as far as what that entry salary is that people would accept. And interestingly enough, the survey also said that while women's pay expectations have gone up 11%. They're still willing to accept about $25,000 a year less on average than men. I thought that was an interesting tidbit.
Yeah, that persists, right? And you still see companies that unfortunately will hire women, especially young women, right? Because they know that they can pay them less. It's still one of the inequalities that we're dealing with in business.
But meanwhile, like you say, there's a lot of interesting sectors that are doing very well, despite the criticism we were talking about around Zoom, about their whole return to office speech being kind of counterintuitive to what they do. Perhaps, at least that was my opinion. And then all the trouble they got into for saying they were going to use customer data for training AI. They beat their expectations on revenue. So it's just wild stuff.
Yeah, and gave good guidance, right, for the rest of the year on top of beating across the board, it seems. So, right, we're in a stage where nobody's quite sure, right? Like I said, I listen to Bloomberg every morning, and everyone just admits nobody really knows. It's anyone's guess. Soft landing, not soft landing. Rate hike, not hit, right? Pause, now pause, right? China's fine. China's a problem, and so it's just a remarkable stage of uncertainty about what's going to happen at this point. Right?
So beyond the economy thing, regulators gave the green light to driverless taxis in San Francisco. So this has been a long time coming.
Right. And I saw an article that somebody had wrote about taking a couple of rides in the taxi, the kind of odd feeling of sitting in the back seat and watching the steering wheel kind of move by itself and just being a passenger. Right after what seems like a decade of saying this is coming, and now it's here. We'll see now what these are all. I would imagine you're a passenger in a driverless car. You're part of the experiment, right, Dan? So people are volunteering to be part of that. I know for a fact that this isn't exactly worked out. So knock on wood, hope for the safety, and that all things go well as this experiment moves forward. I wouldn't do it, but a brave soul, kudos to those who are willing to be part of the machine. Right.
Well, I grew up going to my grandma's house, and I would have been happy to be in a driverless car versus being in her car. So I guess it depends on what you're comparing it to. But it's interesting. This is obviously not a new topic. I remember one of our members, organization that we worked with years and years and years ago. This executive had the privilege of being in like one of the first. I don't think it was even open to the public, because it was a company thing, like part of a B2B company meeting or something. Anyway, he got to go in this driverless car, and this is easily 8 or 9 years ago. And he said it was an hour-long drive, and he said it was 3 very distinct stages. He said the first stage, the first 20 minutes was he was scared out of his mind. He said the second 20 minutes, you had this feeling of this is the coolest thing, the coolest technology, I've ever been a part of. And then he said the last third of the drive, he said, was boring, because you're used to driving yourself, or being in those situations. So
and I think that corresponds to, we have one of our cars is a Volvo and SUV, and it has full pilot, what they call, whatever it's called, full pilot. And so when I first got it, because it will drive itself, and it's exactly that third phase. Like the first part, you're terrified and you're afraid, and you keep waiting to grab the wheel, or you brake too soon. Phase 2 is you realize it's doing a better job than you are, right? So it's very cool, because it even comes to, especially in stop start traffic, it'll come to a complete stop after the upgrade, and it'll just keep going. So it's more attentive than you are, right? And then I guess phase 2 is, I use it all the time now, and especially on long trips. And it's wonderful. You just sit back, let the Volvo drive, and I think it's doing a better job on a long 2-hour stint, right, on a highway than I would. It doesn't ever get tired. It doesn't lose focus. It doesn't play with CarPlay, right? It's always driving, and the way you can customize it, it seems to work extremely well. So maybe it's just as simple as that.
I'm excited about it. I've had those features as well. In fact, I think I had maybe one of the first cars that had, some of those features, and I was always excited about it during the test drive. They got me to spend extra money for the package that included it. Mm-hmm. And then I've always been kind of disappointed with it long-term, because at least the ones I've had, it like checks to make sure you're touching the steering wheel every couple minutes. I'm like, that kind of defeats even the Teslas now have kind of downgraded some of that functionality in the name of safety. So it's kind of like, what's the point? But now, if this technology, gets approved in San Francisco and then California and then other places, maybe you get to that point, and it plays into our conversations about the workforce and the gig economy. And, I think ultimately this is a good thing for, the workforce, and also, environmental. Like, there's all these cars that sit in our garages. I mean, I think that was the original, Tesla taxi, analysis, where they said, the average car, I forget the number, but the average car sits, useless in a garage 80% of the time.
Well, also it's not polluting when it's sitting there, but you're right about that, right? By the way, speaking of cars, interesting article in the New Car magazine, which asks the question is, what's greener, your electric vehicle or old school combustion? And it was pretty clear from the article that up as of now, you pick your pollution, right? One is sort of carbon imprint up front, when you're like electric batteries, mining, all that kind of stuff. And then there's the one when you drive it. The combustion cars are still cleaner, total life cycle, believe it or not, than EVs. The two things will change. One is apparently they're waiting for the first generation of batteries, millions of batteries, to become recyclable, because the energy or the process to recycle a new battery and make it ready for new is much cleaner than making a brand new battery from scratch, right? And as the production process, the factories themselves have to get more efficient. But as of right now, believe it or not, it's still, from a carbon standpoint, a combustion car is still better than an EV. Should change in the next decade or so, but
no, it's interesting. Yeah, I know. I've seen a lot of those things where it's like, you think, we talked a little bit about this, the whole supposed ESG thing, and the reality is some of these things are the manufacturing process is not green at all. So
I have a friend who bought a new Audi Q4 and got rear-ended a few months ago, and the car has been in the shop for now 3 months because nobody knows what to do with it. Right? There's between Audi and the battery people and the body shop, right? There's a whole process of having to almost lift the entire car off to inspect the battery, which is a different team that does that. So the insurance company, Audi manufacturing, right, and the local service shop down in Florida, they can't figure out, what happens to this car at this point, right? And it was he said, look, be careful. I never occurred to me that he got rear-ended waiting to turn and left from somebody coming at high speed, but he's lost the car for 3 months, and no one's working on the car at this point because they can't figure out exactly what the plan is.
So still some kinks to work out, right? I mean, even back to this, the safety thing, where a lot of the general safety stuff is supposedly better than human driving. There's some other like ancillary issues, right? You've seen these videos where the map forces all these cars down a path, and then there's like a line of cars on some side road, and they don't know what to do. And in fact, this this San Francisco article and CNN, they were talking about there's been pushback from a lot of the emergency workers. The San Francisco Fire Department has recorded 55 incidents of driverless vehicles interfering with emergency responses just this year. And I actually saw a video last week, I don't know if it was a TikTok or where the heck it was these days, but where it was literally a cop telling this car to turn left to avoid a scene. And he's yelling at these people, and they're just like, "There's nobody driving. We're not driving it."
Or can you imagine the typical thing of seeing sirens, flashing lights in your mirror, and you pull over, put your hazards on, right, and let a fire engine pass. I wonder if these cars know if there's lights coming behind you, or there's some kind of transponder that tells it, pull over while this ambulance goes by. So, but like I said, it's an experiment. So early days. And again, kudos to those of you who are willing to be part of the learning process for the software companies who are making these systems.
So the last story I wanted to get your input on before we jump to our main one is a couple more things around censorship came up this week. The Biden administration is fighting in court with some social media companies around essentially stopping misinformation that affects public communications, I guess, right around disasters and emergencies and things like that. And YouTube is pushing back on some misinformation on their platform around cancer treatments and things like that. So you start to see some of this, the censorship thing get pushed back and forth.
It's just impossible. I don't know what the statistics are, but I know it's millions of videos get uploaded into YouTube every day. Maybe even if you did the best you could to try to police that, and you have got software to help you, I don't know how any platform, right, is going to be able to look and identify everything that's out there. So, and then again, the question of, well, who decides is this is sort of worth sort of taking down, right? And I don't see an easy answer to this problem. It's been a problem from day one on the internet. It continues to be a problem, and I don't see it's getting solved anytime soon, right, Dan?
So let's get to the main story, which is storytelling and culture change, right? I mean, we have this issue of, I think it's one of the main issues that we see all the time in, implementing technology as a whole, but it's a problem in all companies where, the issue is not so much the technology, it's the internal change, the culture change within the company.
Well, to me, this is always it's one of these evergreen issues. When I worked with for a few years at a very senior executive, private forum, and I always say that if you'd asked what was the number one issue across all the different C-suite groups, who we managed, by far it was always storytelling. And whenever a journalist or a writer or a storyteller was at one of the events, right, you could hear a pin drop because this is a critical issue. My sense is that if you're a C-level executive, you typically don't get fired because you don't know the technical aspects of your job, right? It's not, if you're a CFO, you don't get fired because you don't know finance. You would have gotten a job if you didn't. It tends to be kind of chemistry. You didn't gel with the team or the CEO or the board, right? Or it's a story. More often than not, the board loses faith, the CEO loses faith, right? Your team doesn't believe the narrative that drives how you manage and what your plan is, and that becomes the issue. So, my sense is that there probably isn't a more critical skill um, to being a very senior executive for sure, probably a manager or leader at any point. It's interesting because it isn't taught in business school for the most part, right? You don't really take classes in narrative or story creation as you're being educated to be an executive, and yet it becomes a defining skill set, right, of leadership in kind of any form, but especially in business.
I can't tell you how many times, I mean, I would say the vast majority of the times that a new technology doesn't get implemented within an organization, um, it's almost always that, right? It's either that people have tried and failed at changing that internal culture and conducting that communication and storytelling, or it's that they just don't want to because they either feel a certain way about it, or they just know it's going to be such an uphill battle that they don't want to, spend their time or risk their career on trying to push that boulder uphill.
And by the way, all the more so because the kinds of people who study business, which is a more technical, let's say, subject, right? Engineers, business people, economics, finance people, are that tends not to be right where the storytellers are, right? They tend to be in the humanities. This is one of the intersection of humanities and business because storytelling, which is emphasized and studied carefully in humanities, isn't part, for the most part, right, of the business curriculum or the finance curriculum, economics or engineering. And so this is the problem. When you become an executive or a manager, suddenly this skill becomes critical to you, but it isn't something that you've learned, right, kind of along the way. And as a writer, I talk to people about this. I get asked all the time for advice, and I would say, look, think of story as change over time, right? That's what a story is. So something goes from A to B over some period of time. So if you ask yourself, what is your story? Say it's what is the change and what is the amount of time, right? What will be different? Pick your endpoint and starting point. Is it today and 2 years from now? Today and 3 years from now, right? And then how big is that change, and what is that change, right? Then how much time is it going to take? Sometimes the story is right, but the timeline is off.
Hmm.
We've seen this where, okay, I believe that, but you're not going to do that in 6 months, or you're not going to do that in a year, or you're taking too long, right? You want 5 years for this change to happen. The board wants it done in two. So it's always this issue, the XY of how much, what is the change in any story, whether it's a short story or a novel of 500 pages, right? And then what is the period of time that you're working? Does the novel take place in 24 hours, in 6 months, in a year, over a decade, over an entire lifetime, right? So as you think of as a storyteller, I always ask people to think about this, right? What is the change that occurs in the beginning, the middle, and the end? And then in what time frame, right, are you operating? And both of those have to align in order for a great story to work.
Why isn't it taught? I mean, you're an educator, Carlos. Why is this not taught in business? I mean, when I went to business school, there were certain things you had to take, right? You had to take accounting, you had to take certain business management stuff. Obviously, makes sense. Certain technology, whatever. And I always kind of scratched my head at the accounting. I mean, obviously, if you're going to own a business, you need to understand finance at a high level. But I always thought I remember my accounting teacher, who I was very friendly with. I remember saying to her, I said, I don't need to hear any of this because I'm just going to hire an accountant, right? But this spans everything across an organization.
Yeah. I think either because they think you should have picked some as an undergraduate, maybe. I don't know. B school PhDs are very quantitative people. That's how you get a PhD in business. It's by doing field research or
This is
statistical
more. These are the soft skills,
right?
if
So I
you
think
will.
it's considered like a lot of other things, like change management, quote unquote, soft, vague, not that important, right? But it's the soft, vague, not that important things that get you fired when, when you become an executive for the most part. So I don't understand why, either because they don't value it or they can't teach it. And I think it's a mistake. I've argued about this before that there are two things that I think are missing from the business school curriculum and should be taught in a very serious way. The first one is ethics. And I wrote about this a couple of years ago where I looked at, I think, the top 4 or 5 business schools and looked to see if any one of them had a serious, hardcore ethics class, right? Where you discuss ethics in a very serious way. And I couldn't find one. The other one is this issue of the creation of narratives, aka storytelling. So once you get into business, you get into a crisis. That's not the time to figure out what you believe in, right? Ethically, it should be done long before that. And likewise, when suddenly you're told, come to the board meeting next week and explain to us how you're going to transform this organization, that's a tough time to start googling storytelling,
Right.
right? Because something that you should have picked up along the way.
And there's an irony here too, right? I mean, being in the tech space, I'm sure it's prevalent in a lot of different industries and definitely an issue everywhere. But it strikes me that technology people, like you say, are very quantitative, very binary, plus yes or no, true or false. So this gray area, where all these soft skills exist, is very unique and very foreign to so many of these technology companies that are then trying to sell technology services. And at one point it was, hey, I'm a technical person and I'm selling to another technical person. But a lot of this stuff has evolved to the point where you have technical people now selling and marketing to business users, right? More of this as a service economy, outcome based managed services. So it's not always a technical to technical conversation, as we've talked about. Now you have marketing and sales where it doesn't match up with what the problems are that an organization is facing, and maybe that's the story that kind of bridges that gap, right?
And I think back to a consulting. Uh, we were doing an orals presentation for a big transformational project, and one of the executives, the C-suite executives, asked me on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you can do this in your, 1 being you can do this in your sleep, and 10 being it's extremely difficult, right, or impossible. Where is this project? And I remember walking up to the flip chart and writing an 11 and circling it and saying, it's never going to happen. Right? You know it's not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen because I haven't heard anything in this conversation that says to me that you're dealing with the realities. I had just come from a 2.5 year transformation project with another client. I said was hand to hand combat, right, with this company to make it something that for a lot of the company didn't want to become, and it was successful. But I know how hard it was, and I know that we had to craft, right, a narrative that the company could believe in, and had to believe it, right. And I didn't hear it from this client. So I don't care how much money you spend on consultants or how much knowledge you have. I didn't hear the story. And I said, I can help you create that. And I think that's very important. It's the most important thing. Then I said, well, what does that look like? And I sort of drew him a picture, right, of what I thought this was going to be like. And we won the project on that story, right, on the flip chart, right? More than the hundreds of hours spent on the proposal was the fact that there was a story that everybody could believe in. And I see this time and time again, right? I think part of because human beings want to be part of something. There's an innate need to create or desire to create, right? So even especially as technologists, which I think people don't underappreciate, right? I think a lot of people become technologists because they're creative people in the literal sense of the word. They want to create an app, right? A capability that wasn't there before. And so the best stories are stories of creation, right? What are we going to create in this company 2 years from now? As my first consulting boss said to me one time, we sell every project with 2 photos, before and after.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if I don't see the pictures in the proposal, you haven't done a good job. So go back and rewrite it until there's a clarity around 2 photographs. The client on the day we walked in the door, and the client on the day that we finished the project, right? I never forgot that. And that's, they show me what's there when we start, show me what's there when we finish.
Yeah, and it's funny because growing up in sales and marketing, that's something that I was able to determine early on the ones that were able to illustrate that versus the ones that were not. That was to me like a good marketing and a bad marketing campaign, or a good pitch and a bad pitch. It was the ones that were able to show that. I remember being at a course at one point where they literally show you that proverbial chart of you're on one side of the cliff and there's the other side of the cliff, and you want your product market fit is the bridge to get that person from that one side of the cliff to the other. But it's not really talked about. At least I haven't seen it talked about as much, outside of a sales and marketing context. Like, you think back to those really cheesy infomercial commercials where they show the before picture in black and white with the person grimacing, right? And then they show the happy person at the end, right? But how do you do that? Certainly from a sales and marketing standpoint, but how do you do that? For a company culture where you say, hey, this is kind of where we are. We're in the black and white, grimacing phase, and this is what it looks like, and how do we get from A to B?
And also the fundamentals of a great story, right? If you think about sort of ancient plays, novels, movies, right? The stories kind of fall into 3 parts. There's the presentation of what I always call like of the challenge, right? Or we might in the activity might call it the contest, right? What has to happen, right? So wow, in part 1, I think about something as still like Liam Neeson's the movie where his daughter gets taken. Okay, phase 1, daughter kidnapped. There's
Right.
the contest. There's the challenge. There's the struggle. Whatever it is, we're going to rob a bank, or a casino, Ocean's 11, right? There's the exposition of what is the thing that has to be accomplished, or how has the hero been imperiled, or what conflict has been created. Part 2 then is the evolution, the struggle, right? The Rocky is so wonderful because the all that Rocky has to do just to get into the ring, right? The ring almost becomes anticlimactic in a way because and he loses the first fight, and it doesn't really matter because it was the montages of him training, punching the beef, everything in his life, right? No money, that becomes this wonderful struggle. And then part 3 is the denouement, right? The conclusion, whether it's a happy ending or not a happy ending, but it's a happy ending. The struggle is attained, the challenge is met, the daughter is recaptured, or, Rocky makes it all the way to the bell, which was the real goal. Remember, right? It wasn't winning. And we recognize these things in films. Most executives can without even thinking about it. It's second nature. And yet when you say, what is the story of your company? What is the story of your organization? What is your transformation? Suddenly, these basic three things are missing, right? What is the challenge? Show me, describe to me what is the thing that has to be solved, created, restored, found, right? Two, what is going to be the struggle, right, that we're going to have to go through? Um, Rocky is not Rocky if he gets offered to fight and he doesn't do anything, he just shows up, right? It's
Yeah, yeah,
there must be a struggle, there must be an evolution for the story to be compelling. And then what does winning look like, right? What is the final scene? What does success mean for us? And I think too many times executives can't articulate the first, haven't been honest or haven't thought enough about the second, right? And don't know what the third even is, right? What is success a year?
yeah,
I
yeah,
used to have with the client, we're sitting here a year from now, you're happy with my project. What happened, right? What exists? What occurred? What is different about your organization that as I walk out the door, you say you did a great job? And I think that's the thing. Storytelling, if I were in a leadership position, I would just think about that as you craft a story, especially of transformation, one of our topics, right? Digital transformation. Right? What must change? What will have to happen? What will the struggle look like? Is it over a year? Or is it over 2 years? Who will play what role,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
then we are sitting around 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you're a successful, transformative leader. What does that look like? What exists? Mhm.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting that kind of methodology. That there's a guy I follow. He's a business consultant. I think his name is Donald Miller, and he's got something called the Story Brand Framework, and it's very much about that. I think from a business. Sales and marketing standpoint, but I think it could be adapted for any internal cultural change, and that's what he talks about. He talks about figuring out that people love stories, people love movies, and you have to, in order to communicate it properly, you got to figure out who are the characters, who's the hero of that story, and what is the I guess the climax or the resolution, the problem that they have, the plan to reach to overcome that problem, and what is the outcome of that movie look like. And the thing that was interesting to me in one of the I think podcasts that he had was he talks about people often get the hero of the story wrong, right? You want you don't necessarily want to you don't want to be the hero. You want the person that you're trying to convince. You want to show them how they could be the hero of their own story.
It's like when I first started going to India, I got really interesting advice from an executive friend of mine in India. And he said the best most trips when executives come and clients come to India are a waste of time. In fact, they're worse than waste of time. They're drags of time because the team here goes crazy. They want the visit to be really important, to be excellent. So we spend weeks getting ready for a client visit, and nothing gets done, right? Uh, Contrast those with every once in a while you get somebody here who asks one question: how do I make the team here better?
Hmm.
If I'm going to be in India for 5 days, how were they better when I left because I visited than uh, than had I not come? If you can't answer that question, don't take the trip. Right? I remember talking to a client one time. Said, "I want to go to India and I want to bring my executive team." And I go, "Why?" Well, I want to learn. Well, watch a documentary. Right? You don't need to go to India to learn about India. You're going to take up. You're going to stop all work for at least 5 days while you're there, right? For half the team, which is going to be super happy just to make you feel like you had a nice time. You're not really going to learn anything, and you're going to come back, and the team will be behind by 3.5 days of work. So until you can figure out how do you make the team better by being there, don't go. Right? And if that takes you 6 months, great, right? Think about it. If you can't answer that question, don't get on a plane. Don't bring half the C-suite with you either. So I think that's the interesting is what is the story, right? What are you trying to accomplish? And I think you're right. In that case, the hero isn't the client. The hero is the team. And how is your presence right in front of that team get any better? And this is something that I learned from as I became a manager was at first it's like, well, okay, I need to make myself better. Then you go, no, it's not, right? I'm here to make you better. How does working for me for a year leave you a better person, right? A better technologist, a better consultant, a better manager, a better whatever it is that your job is. And that's my job more than anything else. So I think that if you tell somebody that story, come to work for me because my job is to make you better at yours.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear that story, right? As opposed to, hey, come here because there's some role I need you to fill, so help me get promoted. Uh, I think that it's not even that hard, I don't think, right? We know stories because we hear them from the time we're children and we grew up listening to them, watching them. So if we ask somebody, what's a great movie, describe the story, people can do it over and over again. It's really funny. But then when you ask them, okay, now write a great story for your organization, it's like you're asking them to do something they've never thought about before.
That's interesting, right? Because we're naturally storytellers, right? It's why we suppose one of the reasons why we survived as a species when others didn't, right? But we don't. We seem to have lost that. I don't know. Is it a technology thing, or we're just so not connected to survival, the most of us in the developed world, that we just
I
don't
think
think
it
like
gets
this?
devalued, right? I think it gets devalued along the way. And I remember talking to an executive one time. She had just become, I think, like an SVP or something at a fashion company, and she was asking for some coaching, and she was really struggling because she said the last people who had my job didn't make it 2 years, neither one of them, and I just took over. I'm the third person, right? So I'm odds are I'm not going to make it 2 years either. And she said, I've been there for a few months and I'm really struggling. And I said, it's because you're now being judged on invisible criteria, right? She came up through sales. And I said, when you were a salesperson, you were judged on visible criteria. What's on the spreadsheet, right? And while, yeah, that's still part of the equation, now you're also being judged on things you can't see that you've never really thought about. It's like that movie, I think it was Catherine Zeta-Jones, who has to walk through these lasers to steal some kind of jewel, right? And some of them are visible and some of them are not. That's kind of what it's like to be an executive. You're walking through a room and there are these invisible lines that if you break them, you're in trouble. And so learning to see the unseen is absolutely critical. And I think storytelling is devalued, like I said, in business technical education, which is unfortunate because it is a matter of life and career, life and death, the higher you go up in an organization.
So you sent me this really interesting Harvard Business Review research where they went into companies and figured out what some of the common denominators are for successful company culture change, and there are a couple key takeaways from that.
Yeah, I think that like you said, like, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see uh, the question becomes, right, the best companies are able to articulate to their employees, right? Again, the story of not just of what they want to be, but how they're going to be there, right? And there are certain traits. Authenticity is one of the things that are available that makes somebody come across, right, as a good leader. And by the way, we'll stop here. In my book, I talk about Aristotle's three modes of persuasion, right? Character, argument, and emotion. And the first one is character. And I explain to people they have been conditioned to think of themselves as not being part of the story, right? And I say, look, it's like having a ship with a mast with no sail. It's absolutely critical, right, that you are part of the story. Whatever role you're going to play has to come from you. Who you are makes you in the right way believable. And I think this is a great point. It's not an anodyne thing, right? It's not about the company. I used to always joke that when I worked in Brazil, Brazilians will do nothing for a company, they'll do anything for a person.
Hmm.
And so what you want to do is you want to go to Brazil when times are fine. Go, have fun, get to know them, right? That way, if there's a problem, pick up the phone and call. Americans tend to be the way around, right? They call when everything is fine. They get on a plane when there's a problem. No. You're right. In that culture and a lot of other cultures, it's the other way around, right? Go when there's no crisis. So you have time to be known and to be understood. If you do that, if and when there's an issue, you don't need to get on a plane because they know who you are and they know why you're there, right? So again, I think this is a critical point, which is what role do you play in your own story? And again, time and time again, you ask executives, what what role do you have in this story, right, in this movie? Who are you, right? Uh, they can't articulate that very well. Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is a big one too, right? I mean, they talk about, breaking with the past and laying a past the future. People are, it's funny, as much as you say we've gotten away from stories, we still form our opinions about things through stories, right? There's that old adage, if you're happy with an organization, you tell one person. If you're unhappy with a customer experience, yeah, then you tell whatever it is, seven people. So we tell these stories, and I think with a lot of people, within the organization, you are, no matter what the guy said, whatever the boss says at the company retreat, or the stakeholder meeting, or whatever it is, your experiences drive what you really believe is the path of that company.
Yeah, and I would amend this one in one slight way, and that is you break with the past, but you acknowledge it exists. And let me give you an example. I remember going in to talk to a client, and they wanted to do, I think it was an SAP project, right? And they had tried twice before and had failed. So I asked, why did the first two projects fail? And the client didn't want to talk about it. And he said, I don't want to talk about what didn't work. I want to talk about what's going to work. And I said, I know that, but I need to understand, like, was it resourcing? Was it the software company, the consult, like what was the problem? And and really they didn't want to discuss it. And then and then the funny said, why does it matter why those two failed? I said, well, because you're asking me how to get to London, right? And it's a big difference if we're sitting in Manchester or Chicago, right?
Mhm.
So I'll give you directions. I just need to know what's the starting point, right? Is it a dysfunctional culture that you want to make successful, or was it an external factor that caused the project to succeed? So I think that this issue of, okay, maybe the single biggest thing, right, in business that we've seen, I think maybe you would agree, Dan, is when someone makes a claim about culture, or a story to be realized that doesn't fit the reality,
Yep. Yep.
right? That everybody understands it, right?
Which is the majority of the time, by the way. And I think it's actually gotten more difficult now. There's a member, I think I mentioned on a previous show, that has built a virtual office platform for companies that have distributed workforces and remote and work from home employees, and it's a collaboration tool, and it's a communication tool and all those things. But that's really what it does. It fosters an environment that feels like brick and mortar, but in a virtual or hybrid world. And I think that what's lost in a remote world today that these guys are trying to solve is, the reality is you have that meeting, right, where the boss says whatever, and then it used to be people would get together afterwards and
Yeah.
talk about what they really thought, right? But you lose that now, right? And so, like, you hear the big meeting, and then you get together with your team, and maybe your team leader says, okay, well, that's the big grandiose thing, but here's what's really happening on the ground, and you kind of marry those two stories up together. A lot of that's lost in this work from home culture, I think,
And
too.
that's critical because everybody, like I said, I think that the thing that will destroy a story, right, is if the starting point just isn't believed, right? That people hear a leader describe an environment and it isn't described accurately.
Meaning, this is not the way you see it, is not the way it really is,
Right.
right?
You're talking about it, and then we know the joke about what company are you describing? Because it isn't this one, right? So I guess good luck in your new role because you must not be talking about this organization. And so the that goes back to my why did things fail, right? And I tell you, one of the in all my years of consulting, one of the things that I always said was you knew you were in a very good company because they talked about failure. They talked about failure and they analyzed it, right? They understood it. Why do we fail, Right? I remember talking. I used to do a lot of car racing stuff, and I remember a teacher said to me one time, when people stop racing, they stop racing when they can't figure out why they crashed. As long as you can figure out why I went too fast, the tires were right, my position was off, I get back in the car. The day you can't figure out why, it's the day you retire. And I remember I was a bike racer and I had the same feeling. Okay, if there was something because I went in too hot or I missed the gravel, whatever, but you stop riding when you fall and you don't know why because you can't fix I don't know why this happened, right? So I think that if you can't say to someone, listen, I understand the issues are the following. There's constraints about budget, or there's an issue because the CEO doesn't like A, B, or C, or somebody isn't fully supportive of this. But I think it's important have that conversation, right, and build a narrative from a point that's real. Um, because when the starting point is fictional, then how would anybody believe the end?
Yeah.
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 So
So Carlos, your book is out now. The Rules of Persuasion is available on Amazon. What is the I know it's tough to do this in 60 seconds, but what does the book say about this topic?
uh, the book says that the persuasion is built about it in a narrative form, right? And there's I'd say I don't know hundred, but countless examples in the book of great communicators doing this, and it can be done in one sentence. It can be done over a long period of time, right? But it is a narrative that does three things, right? It incorporates the character of the storyteller. It presents only the necessary facts and logic, only as much as needed, not more, and it generates the right emotional response in the audience. And this is the third thing, is another thing. Great stories are almost always emotional stories, right? We feel uplifted, we feel exhilarated, we feel inspired, whatever that is. And so the best leaders create emotion in an audience. And I think that as this is another thing which is not really understood in business narrative is the use of emotion in corporate setting, either because people have tried it and failed or because they're afraid of it. And I have a little thing called learning to love emotion, right? Because it's when it's used correctly, it's a fantastically powerful thing, right? Having a boss who makes you feel something positive, right? Exhorted or exhilarated, even in tough situations, that's a wonderful environment to be in. And people will sort of do any, I've had bosses like that, a few. And boy, I remember thinking, I will do anything for this person, right? I'll work as hard as I have to. I'll go the extra, forget the extra mile, I'll go the extra 10 miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I want to feel that feeling again, right? That I feel when this person believes that we've done the best that we can do. So yeah, I think it's crafting the persuasive message, right? The great narrative is really the combination of these three things, and it is a skill that anyone can improve. That's the thesis of the book. It is not a soft skill. It is not a vague thing. It operates by rules, and the rules can be taught and they can be learned. Hence the title.
Go check out Carlos's book. It's $18. Best $18 you'll spend. Carlos, it's too cheap, buddy. We gotta raise the price.
Well, that
But
costs
no,
money calling me up. So yeah.
But also, we have a webinar also coming up with Carlos where we're going to go through all this in much more detail. Webinar/masterclass. Look out for that. But definitely grab the book. It's already got it's got 5.0 rating. I hope I don't screw that up, Carlos. Give you a 4.5 or something.
Somewhere in that vicinity, I hope.
There we go. But no, check out Carlos's book. And, as always, if we can help you, we're offering free coaching sessions and state of the industry briefings on a variety of digital transformation, automation, and AI topics. Go to network.irpaai.com. In the meantime, we'll see you next Wednesday. Yes, Carlos?
Absolutely. Back next Wednesday. See you soon.
Enjoy the balance of summer, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. Bye-bye.